Officer Derek Matthews stands frozen in the courthouse hallway, his badge trembling in his hand as he stares at the nameplate on the office door. Chief Justice Amelia Washington. The same black woman he just humiliated in the elevator now sits behind the bench that will decide his fate forever. Before we dive into this shocking story of justice and karma, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible, true stories that will leave you speechless. You won't believe what happens when this officer discovers who he really messed with. Let's get started. Dawn was breaking over Jefferson County Courthouse as Judge Amelia Washington pulled into the empty parking lot. At 42, she had become the first black female judge in the county's 150-year history, a milestone that came with both pride and immense pressure. Today would test everything she had worked for. Amelia stepped out of her modest Honda Civic, deliberately choosing to dress casually in dark jeans, a gray hoodie, and sneakers. She needed to arrive early, before the media circus began, to review the most important case of her career in private. The landmark police brutality case of Marcus Thompson versus Jefferson County Police Department would set precedent for the entire state, and she wanted no distractions. The courthouse stood silent and imposing in the morning light, its marble columns casting long shadows across the steps where protesters would soon gather. Amelia had spent sleepless nights preparing for this moment, knowing that every decision she made would be scrutinized not just for its legal merit, but through the lens of her race and gender. Her journey to this bench had been anything but easy. Growing up in the poorest neighborhood of Jefferson County, Amelia had watched her mother work 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Her father, a construction worker, had faced daily humiliation from racist supervisors who questioned his intelligence and work ethic. Despite their struggles, both parents had instilled in her an unwavering belief in education and justice. Harvard Law School had been a culture shock for the girl from the projects. She was one of only 12 black students in her class, constantly feeling the weight of representation on her shoulders. Professors would call on her whenever discussions turned to civil rights, as if she were the spokesperson for her entire race. Some classmates whispered that she was only there because of affirmative action, a cruel assumption that motivated her to graduate summa cum laude. Her early career as a public defender had shown her the harsh realities of the justice system. She had watched countless young black men receive harsher sentences than their white counterparts for identical crimes. She had seen families torn apart by a system that seemed designed to perpetuate inequality rather than deliver justice. The appointment to the bench 3 years ago had been both a triumph and a target. Death threats arrived regularly in her mailbox, some containing racial slurs so vile they made her hands shake. But she persevered, building a reputation as a tough but fair judge who held everyone accountable, regardless of their badge or bank account. Now, as she climbed the courthouse steps, Amelia carried the weight of history on her shoulders. The Thompson case involved allegations of systematic racism within the Jefferson County Police Department. Body camera footage showed officers using excessive force against black suspects at rates significantly higher than with white suspects. The case had drawn national attention from civil rights organizations and law enforcement unions alike. Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old teacher, had been pulled over for a broken taillight and ended up in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a concussion. The officers claimed he had resisted arrest, but body camera footage told a different story. It showed Marcus complying with every command while officers escalated the situation with racial slurs and unnecessary violence. As Amelia entered through the side entrance, she reflected on the irony of her situation. She was about to preside over a case that examined the very prejudices she faced daily. Every time she walked into a room, people made assumptions about her intelligence, her qualifications, her right to be there. Today, she would determine whether the justice system could truly be blind to color. The empty courthouse felt like a cathedral of justice, its high ceilings and solemn atmosphere reminding her of the sacred responsibility she carried. In a few hours, this building would be filled with lawyers, reporters, activists, and citizens all waiting to see if justice could prevail over prejudice. Amelia made her way to her chambers, her footsteps echoing through the marble corridors. She had no idea that in less than an hour, she would face the very discrimination she was preparing to adjudicate. and that her response would become a masterclass in dignity and justice. The courthouse elevator hummed quietly as Amelia stepped inside, her arms full of case files and her mind focused on the day ahead. She pressed the button for the 7th floor, where her chambers awaited. The elevator had become a brief sanctuary, where she could collect her thoughts before facing the intensity of the courtroom. As the doors began to close, a large hand shot through the gap, forcing them back open. Officer Derek Matthews stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the small space with tension. At 51, Derek was a 15-year veteran of the Jefferson County Police Department, his thick build and permanent scowl reflecting years of what he considered thankless service. Derek's eyes immediately locked onto Amelia, his expression shifting from neutral to suspicious in seconds. In his mind, a young black woman in casual clothes carrying papers could only mean one thing: another defendant trying to look respectable for court. He had seen it countless times before, or so he believed. "Well, well," Derek muttered, positioning himself between Amelia and the elevator buttons. "What floor are you heading to, sweetheart? Let me guess. Courtroom 3 for drug charges, or maybe family court for welfare fraud?" Amelia felt her jaw clench but kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that engaging with such ignorance often made situations worse. Instead, she focused on organizing her files, hoping the ride would end quickly. Derek interpreted her silence as guilt. "Don't play dumb with me," he continued, his voice growing louder. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I can spot your type from a mile away. Probably got yourself a public defender and think you can sweet-talk your way out of whatever mess you made." The elevator stopped at the 3rd floor, and 2 court clerks entered. They glanced nervously between Derek and Amelia, sensing the tension but unsure how to intervene. One of them, a young white woman named Sarah, pulled out her phone and discreetly began recording. "You know what your problem is?" Derek continued, now playing to his audience. "No respect for authority. Probably raised without a father figure, thinking the world owes you something. Well, let me tell you something, princess. The justice system doesn't care about your sob story." Amelia's grip tightened on her files, but she remained silent. She thought about her grandfather, who had been lynched for supposedly looking at a white woman the wrong way. She thought about her father, who had endured similar humiliation daily just to provide for his family. She drew strength from their resilience. The elevator stopped again at the 4th floor. A bailiff entered, nodding respectfully to Derek before noticing the tension. "Everything all right in here, officer?" he asked. "Just having a friendly conversation with our future defendant here," Derek replied with a smirk. "Trying to give her some free advice about how things work in the real world." The bailiff looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. The culture of silence that protected officers like Derek was well established, even when their behavior crossed clear lines. Derek turned back to Amelia, emboldened by the lack of intervention. "Let me see your ID," he demanded. "I want to know exactly what kind of trouble you're in today." For the first time, Amelia looked directly at him. Her eyes were calm but steely, holding a dignity that seemed to unnerve Derek momentarily. "I'm not required to show you identification," she said quietly. "I'm not under arrest, and I'm not suspected of any crime." Derek's face reddened. "Smart mouth, huh? That attitude is exactly why your people can't stay out of trouble. No respect, no manners, no common sense." The elevator reached the 5th floor, and Derek's supervisor, Lieutenant Johnson, stepped inside. He immediately sensed the tension, but after glancing at Derek's confrontational posture and Amelia's calm demeanor, chose to look at his phone instead. "Lieutenant," Derek said loudly, "just explaining to this young lady how important it is to cooperate with law enforcement. Some people need to learn the lesson the hard way." Lieutenant Johnson grunted non-committally, still avoiding eye contact with Amelia. The message was clear. Derek's behavior had official sanction through willful blindness. Amelia felt a familiar mixture of anger and disappointment. How many times had she witnessed the same scenario? How many black citizens had endured Derek's abuse while supposed leaders looked the other way? How many complaints had been filed and ignored? The elevator finally reached the 6th floor, and Derek stepped out, but not before delivering one final insult. "Good luck today, sweetheart. You're going to need it." And next time, show some respect when an officer is trying to help you. So, the doors closed behind him. The remaining passengers stood in uncomfortable silence. Sarah, the court clerk who had been recording, looked at Amelia with obvious sympathy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "That was completely inappropriate." Amelia nodded graciously. "Thank you for documenting it," she said simply. "Evidence is important." The elevator reached the 7th floor, and Amelia stepped out, her composure intact despite the emotional assault she had just endured. She walked toward her chambers, knowing that in a few hours she would face Derek again under very different circumstances. The irony was not lost on her that she was about to preside over a case examining the very behavior she had just experienced. As she reached her office door, Amelia paused to read her nameplate one more time. The Honorable Judge, Amelia Washington. Soon, Derek Matthews would read those same words and realize the magnitude of his mistake. Judge Amelia Washington entered her private chambers and immediately began the transformation from harassment victim to presiding judge. She hung up her casual clothes and donned the black judicial robes that represented centuries of legal tradition and authority. Each piece of her formal attire served as armor against the prejudice she faced daily. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Derek Matthews was holding court in the security office, regaling his colleagues with his elevator encounter. "You should have seen this girl," he bragged, leaning back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. "Typical attitude problem, thinking she was too good to answer simple questions. I put her right in her place." His partner, Officer Jim Bradley, chuckled while reviewing the day's security assignments. "Some people need to learn respect the hard way," he agreed. "Speaking of which, we've got that big police brutality case today. Going to be a circus with all those activists and media people." Derek's expression hardened. "Don't even get me started on that nonsense. Marcus Thompson was resisting arrest, plain and simple. These people always want to play the victim when they don't follow orders." Outside the courthouse, the predicted circus was already beginning. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the morning sky like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Protesters gathered on both sides of the courthouse steps. Civil rights activists on one side chanting for justice, police union supporters on the other displaying Blue Lives Matter flags. The case of Marcus Thompson versus Jefferson County Police Department had captured national attention because of its potential to set precedent. Thompson, a respected elementary school teacher with no criminal record, had been brutally beaten during what should have been a routine traffic stop. The incident was captured entirely on body camera footage, leaving little room for the usual police narratives about perceived threats and justified force. In her chambers, Judge Washington spread the case files across her mahogany desk like pieces of a complex puzzle. The evidence painted a disturbing picture of systematic abuse within Derek's unit. Over the past 5 years, complaints of racial profiling and excessive force had increased by 300%, yet disciplinary actions remained virtually non-existent. Derek Matthews' personnel file alone contained 18 formal complaints from black citizens, ranging from verbal harassment to unlawful detention. Dr. Patricia Williams, an emergency room physician, had been handcuffed and detained for 20 minutes because Derek refused to believe she was a doctor. Reverend Michael Jones had been thrown to the ground outside his own church because Derek claimed he matched the description of a robbery suspect, despite being 68 years old and using a walker. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Yet, Derek had never faced serious consequences. Each complaint had been investigated by his fellow officers and dismissed as unfounded or exaggerated. The blue wall of silence had protected him, while his victims suffered in isolation. Judge Washington reviewed the body camera footage from Marcus Thompson's arrest for the 5th time. The video showed Marcus complying with every command while Derek's colleagues escalated the situation with increasingly aggressive demands. When Marcus asked why he was being arrested, the officers responded with batons and fists. The medical records were equally damning. Marcus had suffered 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and extensive bruising. The emergency room doctor noted that the injuries were consistent with a sustained beating rather than a brief struggle. Marcus had been hospitalized for 4 days and missed 6 weeks of work, devastating his family's finances. What made this case particularly significant was the broader context it revealed. Internal police communications, obtained through discovery, showed a culture of racism that extended far beyond individual officers. Group text messages contained racist jokes, derogatory comments about black citizens, and celebrations of controversial arrests. Judge Washington paused at a particularly disturbing message thread from Derek's unit. "Another one bites the dust," he had written after Marcus's arrest, followed by laughing emojis. His colleagues had responded with congratulatory messages and promises to back him up regardless of the circumstances. The courthouse was filling with spectators, journalists, and legal observers from across the state. The hallways buzzed with anticipation as people took their positions for what many considered a pivotal moment in the fight for police accountability. Now let me ask you something. Comment number 1, if you believe officers like Derek should face real consequences for their actions, or comment number 2 if you think police deserve the benefit of the doubt. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice prevailing against all odds. But here's what Derek didn't know as he continued bragging about his elevator encounter. What do you think will happen when he discovers the true identity of the woman he just humiliated? The answer will shock you more than you can imagine. Derek was assigned as primary courthouse security for this specific case, a decision that would soon prove to be the biggest mistake of his career. As he strutted through the courthouse in his pressed uniform, he had no idea that his victim was preparing to sit in judgment not just of his colleagues, but potentially of his entire future. The irony was about to unfold in the most dramatic way possible, and Derek Matthews was completely unprepared for the reckoning that awaited him just one floor above. At precisely 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened to a flood of spectators, journalists, and interested parties who had been waiting in the hallway since dawn. The gallery filled quickly, with civil rights activists occupying the left side, while police union representatives and off-duty officers claimed the right. The tension was palpable, like electricity in the air before a thunderstorm. Derek Matthews took his assigned position near the defendant's table, his chest puffed with authority as he surveyed the crowd. He spotted several familiar faces among the police supporters and nodded confidently, still riding the high from his morning encounter with what he assumed was just another defendant. The bailiff called for order as the court clerk prepared to announce the judge's entrance. Derek straightened his uniform and adjusted his duty belt, preparing to witness what he assumed would be a quick victory for law enforcement. In his experience, judges typically sided with police officers, understanding the dangerous nature of their work and the split-second decisions they were forced to make. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Amelia Washington," the bailiff announced in a booming voice that echoed through the packed courtroom. Derek casually looked toward the bench, expecting to see the familiar face of Judge Henderson, who had been scheduled to preside over the case. Instead, his blood ran cold as the same black woman from the elevator emerged from chambers, now dressed in flowing judicial robes and carrying herself with unmistakable authority. Judge Washington took her seat behind the bench with practiced grace, her presence commanding immediate respect from everyone in the courtroom except one man who stood frozen in disbelief. She looked out over the packed gallery with calm, professional eyes that briefly met Derek's horrified stare before moving on without acknowledgement. "Please be seated," Judge Washington said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom's sound system. Derek remained standing for several seconds longer than everyone else, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality before him. The court clerk began reading the case details while Derek's world crumbled around him. The woman he had insulted, degraded, and threatened in the elevator was now the most powerful person in the room. She held his career, his reputation, and his future in her hands. Marcus Thompson sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a renowned civil rights lawyer named David Chen. Marcus bore visible scars from his encounter with police, including a slightly crooked nose that had been broken during the beating. His wife sat in the front row, holding their 8-year-old daughter's hand. The defense table was occupied by the county's legal team and representatives from the police union. Their strategy was clear from their opening statements: paint Marcus as a dangerous criminal who had forced officers to use necessary force to protect themselves and the public. Judge Washington listened intently as both sides presented their opening arguments. The plaintiff's attorney methodically laid out evidence of systematic racism within the police department, using statistical analysis and documented complaints to build a compelling case. The defense countered by emphasizing the split-second decisions officers must make in dangerous situations. Throughout the proceedings, Derek found himself unable to concentrate on the legal arguments. His eyes kept drifting to Judge Washington, searching for any sign that she recognized him or planned to acknowledge their earlier encounter. Her professional demeanor gave nothing away. The first witness called was Marcus Thompson himself. As he took the oath and settled into the witness chair, Derek felt his anxiety rising. Marcus began recounting the night of his arrest in a calm, measured voice that contrasted sharply with the violence he described. "I was driving home from my mother's house after helping her with some yard work," Marcus testified. "My daughter was in the back seat, excited because we were going to stop for ice cream. When I saw the flashing lights, I pulled over immediately and turned off the engine." Derek shifted uncomfortably as Marcus continued his testimony. The teacher's account was precise and detailed, describing how he had kept his hands visible on the steering wheel and followed every instruction given by the approaching officers. "The first officer asked for my license and registration," Marcus continued. "I told him I was reaching for my wallet and moved very slowly. My daughter was scared and started crying, which seemed to agitate the officers." Judge Washington took careful notes while Marcus testified, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her thorough understanding of the case. Her questions were fair and balanced, seeking truth rather than advancing any particular narrative. Derek watched in amazement as Judge Washington conducted the proceedings with flawless professionalism. Despite the personal attack he had launched against her just hours earlier, she showed no bias or vindictiveness. Her commitment to justice was evident in every ruling and question. The defense attorney began his cross-examination by attempting to portray Marcus as threatening and non-compliant. "Isn't it true, Mr. Thompson, that you raised your voice at the officers?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied honestly. "When they told my 8-year-old daughter to stop crying or they would arrest her too, I asked them to please be gentle with her. That's when they pulled me from the car." A murmur ran through the courtroom at this revelation. Derek had not been present during Marcus's arrest, but he knew the officers involved. Their reputation for aggressive tactics was well established within the department. The prosecution then presented body camera footage that had been enhanced and analyzed by video experts. The courtroom fell silent as the brutal beating played out on multiple screens. Even some police supporters in the gallery looked uncomfortable as they watched their colleagues repeatedly strike Marcus while he was already on the ground. Derek found himself staring at Judge Washington's face during the video presentation. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but he could see the subtle tightening around her eyes that suggested deep emotional impact. She was witnessing the same type of abuse she had experienced that morning, though in a much more severe form. As the morning session concluded, Derek realized his situation was far worse than he had initially thought. Judge Washington was not just presiding over a case about police misconduct. She was demonstrating through her own conduct what true justice looked like. Her professionalism in the face of his personal attack made his behavior appear even more inexcusable by contrast. The lunch recess was called, and Derek watched helplessly as Judge Washington exited to her chambers. He knew that his recognition of her identity would soon be followed by her recognition of him. The reckoning he had, unwittingly set in motion, was about to accelerate beyond his control. During the lunch recess, Derek Matthews stood in the courthouse corridor like a man waiting for his execution. His hands trembled as he replayed the morning's events, desperately hoping he had somehow misidentified the judge. But there was no mistake. The woman he had verbally assaulted in the elevator was now presiding over the most important case of his career. The revelation came when Derek overheard two court clerks discussing the morning session. Judge Washington handled that opening testimony beautifully, one said. "She's got such command of the courtroom." The name hit Derek like a physical blow. Washington. Judge Amelia Washington. The nameplate he had seen briefly as she exited the elevator now made perfect sense. He had harassed a sitting judge, assuming she was a defendant based solely on her race and casual attire. Derek's first instinct was to flee. He could claim sudden illness, leave the courthouse, and never return. But his supervisor, Lieutenant Johnson, appeared at his elbow before he could move. "Matthews, "You look like you've seen a ghost," Johnson observed with mild concern. "Everything all right?" Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. How could he explain that he had spent 20 minutes that morning insulting and threatening the judge who was now presiding over the case that could determine the future of their entire department? I think I might be coming down with something," Derek managed to croak. Johnson studied him with growing suspicion. "You were fine an hour ago when you were bragging about putting some defendant in her place. What's changed?" The words were out before Derek could stop them, and Johnson's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What defendant? You mean in court? Because if you had an interaction with someone connected to this case..." Derek's silence was answer. Enough. Johnson grabbed his arm and pulled him into an empty conference room, closing the door behind them. "Tell me exactly what happened," Johnson demanded. Reluctantly, Derek recounted the elevator encounter, watching Johnson's face grow increasingly pale with each detail. When he finished, Johnson sat down heavily in a chair and put his head in his hands. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Johnson whispered. "Judge Washington could declare a mistrial. She could recuse herself and cause a 6-month delay. She could hold you in contempt of court. Hell, she could probably have you arrested for intimidating a judicial officer." Derek felt his knees buckle. His 15-year career, his pension, his reputation. Everything was hanging by a thread because of 20 minutes of racist assumptions and verbal abuse. "Maybe she didn't recognize me," Derek said desperately. "I mean, she was looking down at her files most of the time." Johnson looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "She's a Harvard-educated federal judge, Derek. She doesn't miss details. The question isn't whether she recognized you, it's what she's going to do about it." Meanwhile, in her chambers, Judge Washington was conducting her own reckoning with the morning's events. She had indeed recognized Derek the moment she saw him in the courtroom, his shocked expression confirming her suspicions about his identity. Sarah Chen, the court clerk who had recorded the elevator incident, knocked on the judge's door. "Your Honor, I have something I think you should see," she said, holding up her phone. "I recorded Officer Matthews' behavior in the elevator this morning." Judge Washington watched the video with growing sadness rather than anger. Derek's racist tirade was even worse than she had remembered, made more painful by seeing it from an outside perspective. The casual cruelty in his voice, the assumptions he made about her character and background, the complete lack of respect for her humanity, it was all captured in devastating detail. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" Judge Washington asked. "No, Your Honor. I wanted to give it to you first." Judge Washington considered her options carefully. She could use the video to destroy Derek's career immediately. One call to the media would make him a national symbol of police racism. But that would also compromise the trial she was presiding over and potentially create grounds for appeal. Instead, she made a decision that would demonstrate the very principles of justice she had dedicated her life to upholding. "Please send a copy to Internal Affairs and to Lieutenant Johnson," she instructed, "and schedule a meeting with Officer Matthews in my chambers at the end of the day." Back in the conference room, Derek was spiraling into panic. "What am I going to do?" he kept repeating. "She's going to destroy me. My career is over." Johnson was running damage control scenarios in his head. "First, you're going to stop talking about this to anyone else. Second, you're going to behave like the perfect officer for the rest of this trial. And third, you're going to pray that Judge Washington is more professional than you were." Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Internal Affairs requesting his immediate presence for an interview. His stomach dropped as he realized the scope of his predicament was expanding beyond the courtroom. "They want to see me," Derek said, showing Johnson the message. Johnson nodded grimly. "It's starting. Whatever happens next, you brought this on yourself." As Derek walked toward the Internal Affairs office, his mind raced with memories of all the complaints filed against him over the years. Each one had been dismissed or ignored, protected by the code of silence that governed police departments. But this time was different. This time, his victim had the power to demand real accountability. The realization that his actions had consequences, real career-ending consequences, was hitting Derek for the first time in his adult life. The immunity he had enjoyed as a white police officer was evaporating before his eyes, replaced by the cold reality of justice applied equally. Judge Wei. Washington returned to the courtroom for the afternoon session with her usual composure, but Derek was nowhere to be found. He had been suspended pending investigation, his security duties reassigned to another officer who treated everyone with respect regardless of their appearance. As the trial resumed, Judge Washington carried the weight of her dual role as both victim and arbiter of justice. Her handling of Derek's misconduct would be watched carefully by legal experts and civil rights advocates nationwide. The precedent she set would echo far beyond Jefferson County Courthouse. The recognition moment had passed, but the reckoning was just beginning. Derek Matthews was about to learn that karma, when delivered through the justice system, could be both swift and merciless. When court reconvened after lunch, Derek Matthews was conspicuously absent from his security post. Word had already begun to spread through the courthouse that the officer had been suspended pending an internal affairs investigation, though the specific reasons remained officially confidential. Judge Washington took the bench with her customary dignity, giving no outward sign of the morning's dramatic events. The afternoon would bring some of the most compelling testimony in the case, and she was determined that Derek's misconduct would not overshadow the pursuit of justice for Marcus Thompson and others like him. The prosecution called Dr. Sarah Mitchell as their next witness, a cardiothoracic surgeon who had her own harrowing encounter with Derek Matthews 2 years earlier. Dr. Mitchell, an elegant woman in her early 40s, approached the witness stand with the same confident bearing she brought to the operating room. Dr. Mitchell, the prosecutor began, please tell the court about your interaction with Officer Derek Matthews on the evening of March 15th, 2 years ago. Dr. Mitchell's voice was steady as she recounted the incident. I was leaving the Psy hospital after performing emergency surgery when Officer Matthews pulled me over 3 blocks from the medical center. I was still wearing my scrubs and my hospital ID was clearly visible around my neck. The courtroom was silent as Dr. Mitchell described how Derek had refused to believe she was a doctor, insisting that she must have stolen the scrubs and ID badge. He made me stand in the rain for 45 minutes while he called the hospital to verify my identity, she testified. Even after the charge nurse confirmed who I was, he continued to question whether I was really qualified to be a surgeon. Judge Washington took careful notes, her pen moving steadily across the legal pad. The pattern of Derek's behavior was becoming undeniably clear, each incident building upon the previous one to paint a picture of systematic harassment. Did Officer Matthews explain why he had stopped you? The prosecutor asked. He said I fit the description of a robbery suspect, Dr. Mitchell replied. When I asked what that description was, he said, and I quote, young black female, approximately 5 feet tall, wearing dark clothing. I pointed out that I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall and was wearing bright blue scrubs, but he said I was being argumentative. A collective murmur ran through the courtroom. The absurdity of the stop was evident to everyone present, but Dr. Mitchell's testimony was far from over. The most humiliating part, she continued, was when he handcuffed me and made me sit on the wet curb while he searched my car. He told me that people like me needed to learn respect for authority and that my medical degree didn't make me special. The defense attorney objected to the characterization of Derek's words, but Judge Washington overruled him. The witness may testify to what she heard, she ruled firmly. Dr. Mitchell's testimony continued for another hour, detailing the lasting impact of the encounter on her life and career. She had filed a formal complaint with the police department, but it had been dismissed after a cursory investigation that concluded Derek had acted within policy guidelines. Now, let me pause here to ask you something important. Comment number 1 if you think Dr. Mitchell deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, or comment number 2 if you believe Derek had the right to detain anyone he deemed suspicious. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of justice overcoming prejudice. But here's what makes this testimony even more significant. What do you think Judge Washington was thinking as she heard these details, knowing she had experienced Derek's racism firsthand just that morning? The parallels were impossible to ignore, and the pattern was becoming devastatingly clear. The next witness was Reverend Michael Jones, a 70-year-old civil rights veteran who had been active in the community for 5 decades. Despite his age and frail appearance, his voice carried the power of someone who had spent a lifetime fighting injustice. Officer Matthews approached me outside my church during Sunday service, Reverend Jones testified. I was greeting parishioners after the morning worship when he grabbed my arm and demanded to see identification. The Reverend's account was particularly disturbing because it showed Derek's willingness to harass black citizens even in sacred spaces. He claimed I matched the description of a robbery suspect, even though I was wearing my clerical collar and using a walker due to my arthritis. Judge Washington found herself fighting back emotion as she listened to the elderly minister describe being thrown to the ground by Derek. The image of a man of God being brutalized for no reason other than his race struck at the very heart of what was wrong with the current system. "Did you file a complaint?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes, I did," Reverend Jones replied. "But I was told that Officer Matthews had probable cause to investigate and that I should have been more cooperative. They suggested that my age might have affected my memory of the events." The pattern was becoming impossible to deny. Derek Matthews had harassed a doctor, a reverend, a teacher, and countless other law-abiding citizens, with each complaint dismissed or ignored by his superiors. As the afternoon progressed, more witnesses came forward with similar stories. A black businessman who had been detained outside his own office building, a college professor who had been searched while walking to her car after a university lecture, a veteran who had been threatened with arrest while waiting for a bus in his dress uniform. Each testimony added another piece to the mosaic of Derek's misconduct, creating a picture so clear that even the most skeptical observers could no longer deny the reality of systematic racism within the police department. Judge Washington maintained her professional composure throughout the proceedings, but those who knew her well could see the strain in her eyes. She was witnessing testimony about the very type of harassment she had endured that morning, multiplied across dozens of incidents and years of abuse. The defense tried desperately to challenge each witness, suggesting they were exaggerating or misremembering events. But the consistency of the accounts, combined with documented complaints and medical records, made their denials increasingly hollow. As the afternoon session drew to a close, it was clear that Derek Matthews had become the unwitting star of his own downfall. His pattern of racist behavior, documented across years of complaints, was now being presented as evidence in a case that could reshape police accountability in the entire state. Judge Washington adjourned court for the day, knowing that tomorrow would bring even more damning testimony. But first, she had a meeting scheduled with Derek Matthews himself, a confrontation that would determine whether he had learned anything from his years of abuse or would continue to deny responsibility for his actions. The stage was set for a reckoning that would test the very foundations of justice and equality in Jefferson County. At 5 o'clock sharp, Derek Matthews sat in the waiting area outside Judge Washington's chambers, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The suspension had been immediate and humiliating, with his badge and weapon confiscated while his colleagues watched in stunned silence. The chamber door opened, and Judge Washington's court clerk gestured for Derek to enter. He rose on unsteady legs, his 15 years of police authority suddenly meaningless in the face of true power and justice. Judge Washington sat behind her mahogany desk, still wearing her judicial robes, the weight of her office evident in every aspect of her bearing. She gestured to the chair across from her desk without looking up from the papers she was reviewing. Derek sat down heavily, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. When Judge Washington finally raised her eyes to meet his, he saw no anger or vindictiveness, only a profound sadness that somehow made his shame even more acute. "Officer Matthews," she began, her voice calm and measured. "I believe we need to discuss what happened in the elevator this morning." Derek's mouth went dry. He had rehearsed this moment during the long afternoon hours, but now every prepared excuse seemed to crumble under her steady gaze. "Your Honor, I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Judge Washington interrupted, gently. "That I was a judge? That I was a human being deserving of basic respect? That your assumptions about me were based entirely on the color of my skin?" Derek squirmed in his chair. "I thought you were a defendant. I was just trying to..." "To what? Humiliate me? Intimidate me?" Make me feel small and powerless? Judge. Washington's voice remained steady, but Derek could hear the steel beneath the calm surface. Let me tell you what you actually did, Officer Matthews. You demonstrated exactly the kind of behavior that brought Marcus Thompson to my courtroom today. She opened a file folder and began reading from it. 18 formal complaints filed against you in 5 years. Dr. Patricia Williams, handcuffed outside the emergency room where she works. Reverend Michael Jones, thrown to the ground outside his own church. Professor Lisa Carter, searched at gunpoint while leaving her university lecture. Derek felt sweat beading on his forehead as Judge Washington continued reciting his record. Each incident, when viewed collectively, painted a picture of systematic racism that he could no longer deny even to himself. And this morning, Judge Washington continued, you added my name to that list. The difference is that I have the power to ensure there are consequences for your actions. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I truly am. I made a mistake. Judge Washington leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same intensity she brought to complex legal questions. What exactly are you sorry for, Officer Matthews? Are you sorry for your behavior, or are you sorry you got caught? The question hung in the air like a sword over Derek's head. He opened his mouth to give the expected answer, but something in Judge Washington's expression stopped him. She deserved honesty, even if it destroyed him completely. I don't know, he admitted. I've been doing things like this for so long I never really thought about how it affected people. I just saw you as what? As less than human? As someone whose dignity didn't matter? Judge Washington's voice remained calm, but Derek could see the pain in her eyes. Do you have any idea what it's like to be constantly judged by the color of your skin? To have people assume the worst about you before you even open your mouth? Derek shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. For the first time in his adult life, he was beginning to understand the impact of his actions on others. Judge Washington reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. She placed it on the desk between them, and Derek saw an old, black and white image of a young man in military uniform. That's my grandfather, Judge Washington said quietly. He served in World War II, fighting for a country that wouldn't let him vote when he came home. He was lynched 3 months after, returning from overseas, accused of looking at a white woman the wrong way. Derek stared at the photograph, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. My father worked construction for 40 years, Judge Washington continued. Every day, he faced supervisors who questioned his intelligence, his work ethic, his right to be there. He came home exhausted not just from physical labor, but from constantly having to prove his humanity to people who had already decided he was less than them. She picked up another photograph, this one showing a young, black woman in graduation robes. That's me at Harvard Law School graduation. I was one of 12 black students in my class. Every day, I heard whispers that I was only there because of affirmative action. Every success was questioned. Every failure was used as evidence that I didn't belong. Derek felt tears burning his eyes as Judge Washington continued her story. I became a judge to ensure that everyone receives equal treatment under the law, regardless of their race, gender, or economic status. And this morning, in an elevator in the building where I work, you reminded me that I'm still seen by some Maltese people as nothing more than a stereotype. Your Honor, Derek began, but she raised her hand to stop him. I'm not finished, she said firmly. You have a choice to make, Officer Matthews. You can continue down the path you've been on, harassing innocent people and hiding behind your badge, or you can use this moment to become better. Derek looked up at her, confusion evident in his eyes. What do you mean? Judge Washington stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the courthouse steps where protesters had gathered throughout the day. I could destroy your career with a single phone call. The video of your behavior this morning would make you a national symbol of police racism. You would lose your job, your pension, your reputation. Derek's stomach clenched as she continued. But that wouldn't serve justice. It would only serve revenge. She turned back to face him. Instead, I'm going to offer you something you've never offered your victims. A chance at redemption. Derek stared at her in disbelief. I don't understand. You have two options, Judge Washington explained. You can retire immediately with your pension intact, disappear quietly, and hope the media doesn't pick up this story. Or you can stay, face the consequences of your actions, and work to become part of the solution. What would that mean? Derek asked. Full cooperation with the internal affairs investigation, mandatory bias training, community service in the neighborhoods you've terrorized, public acknowledgement of your misconduct and commitment to change. Derek felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of her offer. After everything he had done, she was giving him a path to redemption rather than destruction. Why? He asked. After everything I've done to you, to others, why would you give me a second chance? Judge Washington returned to her seat, her expression thoughtful. Because that's what justice looks like. Real justice isn't about revenge or punishment for its own sake. It's about creating a better society for everyone. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting his directly. But understand this, Officer Matthews. This is your only chance. If you choose redemption and then fail to live up to your commitments, I will ensure that you face the full consequences of your actions. Derek sat in silence for several minutes, processing the choice before him. He could take the easy way out, retire quietly, and spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. Or he could face his demons, acknowledge his failures, and work to become the kind of officer he should have been all along. I want to try, he said finally. I want to make things right. Judge Washington nodded slowly. Then we'll see if you mean it. But know this. The people you've harmed deserve more than words. They deserve action, commitment, and real change. As Derek left her chambers, he carried with him not just the weight of his past actions, but the possibility of a different future. Judge Washington had shown him something he had never experienced before. Justice tempered with mercy, strength, combined with compassion. The confrontation was over, but Derek's real test was just beginning. 6 weeks later, the courthouse was again packed to capacity as Judge Washington prepared to deliver her ruling in the case of Marcus Thompson versus Jefferson County Police Department. The intervening weeks had brought a flood of additional complaints against Derek Matthews and his colleagues, as citizens who had previously been too afraid to speak out found their voices. Derek sat in the back of the courtroom, no longer wearing his police uniform. He had taken early retirement as part of his agreement with Judge Washington, but he remained to hear the verdict in a case that had fundamentally changed his understanding of justice. The jury had deliberated for only 3 hours before reaching their unanimous decision. Judge Washington reviewed their findings with the same careful attention she brought to every aspect of the case. In the matter of Thompson versus Jefferson County Police Department, she announced, the jury has found in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers from the civil rights supporters, while police union representatives sat in stunned silence. Marcus Thompson broke down in tears as his wife embraced him, their long fight for justice finally vindicated. Judge Washington continued reading the verdict. The jury awards compensatory damages in the amount of $500,000 for medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering. Additionally, the jury awards punitive damages in the amount of $2.5 million to be paid by Jefferson County. The punitive damage award was among the largest in state history for a police misconduct case, sending a clear message that systematic racism would no longer be tolerated. But Judge Washington wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court orders the Jefferson County Police Department to implement comprehensive reforms, including mandatory bias training for all officers, the establishment of a civilian oversight board, and the creation of an early warning system to identify problematic behavior patterns. The reforms Judge Washington mandated would become a model for police departments across the nation. Her detailed order addressed every aspect of police training, accountability, and community relations. Outside the courthouse, news crews interviewed Marcus Thompson as he stood with his legal team. This isn't just about money, Marcus said, his voice strong despite his obvious emotion. This is about ensuring that no other family has to go through what we experienced. The case had attracted national attention, with civil rights organizations hailing it as a landmark victory for police accountability. Legal experts praised Judge Washington's handling of the complex issues, noting how she had balanced the need for justice with respect for due process. Derek watched the celebrations from a distance, feeling a complex mixture of shame and something that might have been hope. The past 6 weeks had been the most difficult of his life, but also the most enlightening. Mandatory counseling had helped him understand the psychological roots of his prejudice, while community service in the neighborhoods he had once terrorized had shown him the human cost of his actions. The internal affairs investigation had resulted in the termination of 3 other officers and the suspension of 2 supervisors who had enabled Derek's behavior through willful blindness. The culture of silence that had protected abusive officers was finally being broken. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the surgeon Derek had harassed, was interviewed by reporters outside the courthouse. "This verdict validates what we've been saying for years," she said. "Racism in law enforcement isn't just about individual bad actors. It's about systems that protect and enable discriminatory behavior." Reverend Michael Jones, despite his age, had also come to hear the verdict. "Justice delayed is justice denied," he told reporters. "But justice delivered gives hope to future generations." The media coverage extended far beyond Jefferson County, with major news networks picking up the story as an example of how the justice system could work when judges had the courage to confront systematic inequality. Judge Washington held a brief press conference on the courthouse steps, her remarks carefully measured but clearly significant. "This case was never about one officer or one victim," she said. "It was about whether our justice system can evolve to meet the promises of equality enshrined in our Constitution." She continued, "The evidence presented in this courtroom revealed patterns of behavior that violated not just the law, but the basic principles of human dignity that should guide all public servants." Derek found himself studying Judge Washington's face as she spoke, remembering their private conversation weeks earlier. She had kept her word, giving him a chance at redemption while ensuring that justice was served for all the victims of police misconduct. The financial impact on Jefferson County was immediate and severe. The $3 million judgment, combined with the cost of implementing court-ordered reforms, would strain the municipal budget for years to come. Several city council members called for the resignation of the police chief, who had consistently denied the existence of systematic problems within his department, but the case's impact extended far beyond financial consequences. Police departments in neighboring counties began implementing their own reforms rather than risk similar lawsuits. Training academies revised their curricula to emphasize community relations and bias recognition. The Jefferson County model became a template for police accountability nationwide. Derek's former colleagues treated him as a pariah, blaming him for the department's humiliation and the reforms they now faced. But Derek had begun to understand that their anger was misplaced. The real problem wasn't his exposure of systematic racism, but the racism itself. As the crowd began to disperse, Derek approached Marcus Thompson, who was still surrounded by reporters and supporters. When Marcus saw him coming, the conversations around them gradually fell silent. "Mr. Thompson," Derek said quietly, "I want you to know how sorry I am for what you went through. I wasn't one of the officers who hurt you, but I was part of the culture that made it possible." Marcus studied Derek's face for a long moment before responding. "Apologies are a start," he said finally, "but real change comes through action." Derek nodded, understanding that his words were meaningless without corresponding deeds. "I'm trying to do better," he said. "I know that doesn't fix what happened, but I'm trying." The exchange was brief, but significant, representing the first step in a long process of reconciliation between law enforcement and the communities they were supposed to serve. As Derek walked away from the courthouse, he saw Judge Washington in the distance, surrounded by legal colleagues and civil rights leaders. She had achieved something remarkable, delivering justice while maintaining the dignity and integrity of the judicial system itself. The verdict was just the beginning. Real change would require sustained effort from everyone involved. But Judge Washington had shown that the justice system could be a force for equality rather than oppression. Derek's journey toward redemption would be long and difficult, but it had begun with a single moment of recognition in a courthouse elevator. Sometimes justice comes through punishment, but sometimes it comes through the harder path of transformation and growth. 18 months after the landmark verdict, Jefferson County had been transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The courthouse that had once been a symbol of unequal justice had become a beacon of hope for communities across the nation struggling with police accountability and racial justice. Judge Amelia Washington stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Law School, delivering the keynote address at her alma mater's graduation ceremony. As she looked out at the diverse class of new lawyers, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Justice, she told the graduating students, is not a destination, but a continuous journey. It requires courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to the principle that all people deserve dignity and respect under the law. The story of her confrontation with Derek Matthews had become a case study in law schools nationwide, used to teach future lawyers about judicial ethics, systemic racism, and the power of principled leadership. But for Judge Washington, it remained deeply personal. Derek Matthews sat in the back of the auditorium, his presence largely unnoticed by the celebrating graduates and their families. His transformation over the past 18 months had been remarkable, though not without struggle and setbacks. After retiring from the police force, Derek had devoted himself to community service and education. He worked with the Southern Poverty Law Center to develop training programs for law enforcement agencies, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked prejudice. His marriage had not survived the public scrutiny and personal transformation. His wife had been unable to accept his acknowledgement of past racism, leading to a painful but necessary divorce. His grown children had initially been angry and embarrassed, but gradually came to respect his efforts to make amends. The community service Judge Washington had required proved to be Derek's most challenging and rewarding experience. Working in soup kitchens, tutoring children, and helping rebuild homes damaged by neglect had shown him the humanity in people he had once dismissed as criminals or troublemakers. Marcus Thompson had used his settlement money to establish the Thompson Foundation for Police Accountability, which provided legal support for victims of police misconduct and funded community programs promoting understanding between law enforcement and minority communities. The foundation's headquarters occupied a renovated building just blocks from the courthouse where Marcus had achieved his victory. The irony was intentional, a symbol of justice rising from the ashes of injustice. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been promoted to Chief of Surgery at Jefferson County Hospital, her experience with police harassment having galvanized her commitment to serving all patients with dignity and respect. She frequently spoke at medical conferences about the intersection of healthcare and social justice. Reverend Michael Jones, despite his advanced age, had become a national figure in the police reform movement. His gentle but firm voice had helped bridge divides between law enforcement and communities of color, always emphasizing forgiveness without forgetting the need for accountability. The Jefferson County Police Department had undergone complete restructuring under federal oversight. Chief Johnson had been forced to resign, replaced by Maria Rodriguez, the first Latina police chief in the county's history. Under her leadership, complaints of racial profiling had dropped by 80%, while community trust in law enforcement had steadily improved. The early warning system Judge Washington had mandated had identified 12 additional officers with problematic behavior patterns. Rather than simply firing them, the department implemented intensive retraining and mentorship programs that had successfully reformed 8 of them. The 4 who could not or would not change had been terminated. Judge Washington herself had been elevated to the state Supreme Court, becoming the youngest black justice in the state's history. Her opinions on criminal justice reform and civil rights had influenced legal thought far beyond state boundaries. The courthouse elevator had been equipped with security cameras and a plaque reading, "Dignity and respect for all." It served as a daily reminder to everyone who entered the building that justice began with how people treated each other in the smallest interactions. As Judge Washington concluded her Harvard address, she shared a final thought that encapsulated her philosophy. True justice is not about punishment or revenge. It's about creating a society where every person can walk with dignity, where every child can dream without limits, and where the content of one's character truly matters more than the color of one's skin. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, but Judge Washington's mind was already on her next challenge. The fight for justice was never finished, only passed from one generation to the next. Derek approached her after the ceremony, maintaining the respectful distance their relationship required. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me a chance to become better." Judge Washington studied his face, seeing genuine change in his eyes. "The work isn't finished," she replied. "It never is. But you've shown that people can change if they're willing to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves." As they parted ways, both understood that their unlikely relationship had produced something valuable. Proof that justice could be both firm and merciful, that accountability could coexist with redemption. The elevator encounter that had begun as a moment of casual racism had evolved into a nationwide conversation about justice, dignity, and the possibility of change. Judge Washington's response had demonstrated that true power lay not in revenge, but in the courage to transform pain into progress. Years later, when law students studied the Thompson case, they would learn that justice sometimes comes through dramatic courtroom victories, but more often through the quiet daily work of treating every person with the respect they deserve. The legacy of that morning in Jefferson County Courthouse continued to ripple outward, touching lives and changing hearts in ways that would be felt for generations to come. Judge Washington had proven that one person, armed with courage and principle, could indeed change the world. Derek Matthews had learned that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of confronting their prejudices and making amends. The officer who had once embodied systematic racism became a powerful voice for reform, his transformation offering hope to others seeking to break free from cycles of hatred and discrimination. The story ended not with perfect resolution, but with the understanding that justice is an ongoing process, requiring constant vigilance and continuous effort from all members of society. Now, I want to hear from you about this incredible story of justice and transformation. Comment below and tell us, do you believe people like Derek can truly change, or do you think Judge Washington was too forgiving? Have you ever witnessed discrimination that changed your perspective on justice? And what do you think we can all do to create a more just society? Don't forget to hit that like button. If this story moved you, subscribe for more incredible tales of justice prevailing against all odds, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and transformation. Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people who can learn from them. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most powerful examples of how individual actions can create systematic change. Remember, justice isn't just about what happens in courtrooms. It's about how we treat each other every single day. Until next time, keep fighting for what's right, and never underestimate the power of dignity, courage, and compassion to change the world. This remarkable story teaches us profound lessons about justice, transformation, and human dignity. Judge Washington's response demonstrates that true strength lies not in revenge, but in maintaining integrity while demanding accountability. Her decision to offer Derek redemption rather than destruction shows how real leaders create positive change through principled action. Derek's journey reveals that even deeply ingrained prejudices can be overcome through honest self-reflection and genuine commitment to growth. His transformation from abuser to advocate proves that people can change when confronted with the consequences of their actions and given opportunities for meaningful redemption. The case highlights how systematic problems require systematic solutions. Individual incidents of discrimination are symptoms of larger cultural issues that demand comprehensive reform, community engagement, and sustained commitment from institutions and individuals alike. Most importantly, this story shows us that every interaction matters. The elevator encounter could have been dismissed as a minor incident, but Judge Washington recognized it as part of a larger pattern that needed addressing. Her courage to speak truth to power, combined with her wisdom to balance justice with mercy, created lasting change that benefited entire communities. Real progress happens when we refuse to accept injustice as normal and work together to build a more equitable society for everyone. What's your take on this incredible transformation story? Do you believe Judge Washington made the right choice in offering Derek a path to redemption instead of immediate destruction? Have you ever witnessed someone completely change their perspective on prejudice and discrimination? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story of justice, courage, and second chances inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that show how ordinary people can create extraordinary change. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who need to hear this powerful message about dignity, accountability, and hope. Thank you for being part of our community and for believing that justice and compassion can triumph over hatred and ignorance. May we all find the courage to stand up for what's right and the wisdom to know when mercy serves justice better than punishment.